This might be the biggest city concept ever. An entire planet covered in urban area, also known as an Ecumenopolis. Totally sci-fi, and yet it's inspired real architects and urban planners who've seriously studied this idea of a planet-wide city. Cause isn't it really the ultimate human flex? A world that never stops being a city, with hundreds of billions and maybe trillions of people living across thousands of levels. Let's take Coruscant from Star Wars. What you're seeing here is the tip of Mount Umate, one of the last remaining natural landscapes. And that's on level 5,216. There's no forest, no sea, just layers and layers of human settlement. Coruscant is inspired by Trantor, which is another planet-wide city from Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. And both these cities are built on the logic that when your city spans a planet, and your empire spans a galaxy, you need top-down rules with extreme power to keep things in order, and just to keep things moving. But this extreme centralization also makes it extremely fragile. Ancient Rome, for example, collapsed when the grain ships stopped coming from Egypt. Now, scale that to a planet, and what we get is not a steady decline, but a spectacular collapse. So the question isn't just, can we build one? It's, could we build one that doesn't collapse under its own weight? This is Coruscant. It's almost the same size as the Earth, but it's home to 1 to 3 trillion people across roughly 5,000 vertical levels, with 100% of the planet's surface covered in urban development. For reference, roughly 29% of the Earth is land surface, and less than 1% of that is urban development. So the urban development accounts for less than a quarter of 1% of Earth. Coruscant is 100%. So one of the most defining features is this extreme vertical hierarchy. This image illustrates it very well. This section is the upper level, but the top of the upper level is what the fans call the Emergent layer. It's low density, but it's got huge symbolic and political weight, with some of the wealthiest people in the galaxy living here. And they, of course, enjoy access to the sky. The Senate and Federal District, Monument Plaza, and the Temple Precinct, they're all located in this area. Just below is a super dense layer where most of Coruscant's population live and work. You can find almost every imaginable industry here, and it contributes to a huge part of the planet's economy. And below that, we have the underworld. There's some extensions of the Canopy District, but the deeper you go down, we get slums and black markets and illegal operations that's actually a key piece of some of Coruscant's most profitable industries. These are areas that are quite far from the Republic's control. And at the lowest floor, we have the structural guts of the city, with machines that keep the planet alive, like power plants and water reservoirs. It's extremely hot and polluted, but maintenance crews often do work and live for months in this area because the transfer back home to the canopy is just too long to do on a regular basis. And the way they build these layers is actually super interesting. So, like I said, Coruscant is inspired by Trantor, but the way they grow is very different. Essentially, Trantor digs downward, and Coruscant builds upwards. Trantor, very early on, set a fixed dome, and that's where the Empire sits. Once they standardize the first layer, it grows downwards, apparently because the air keeps getting toxic. So the top layer stays nice and organized, and all the messiness, it settles underneath as the population grows. Now, Coruscant is different. It doesn't have a fixed top layer. Every few centuries, they build a new mega level, and it recrowns a new top. And each deck could be something like hundreds or thousands of levels. So think of it as kind of a highly planned mega project. And the moment that a new deck is put up, the city starts to build under it. But the further you go down, and the further from the planned top, we start to get retrofits and infills and illegal decks. So we have the planned layer above and increasingly ad hoc layers below. And millennia of layers and layers have created what we call a vertical trap in its purest form, where you're stratified by height, but also by light and heat and power access and time. It is pretty dystopian, but there is actually a real-world framework for a planet-wide city. In the 60s, where all the crazy things happened, it felt like a planet city could actually happen. The global population was growing at the fastest rate in history, especially in cities. And naturally, architects and planners were asking, what happens when the city doesn't stop growing? A lot of crazy projects came out during that time. And that's when an architect by the name of Constantinos Doxiadis started sketching his idea of a planet-wide city and called it an Ecumenopolis. But what's interesting is that he believed if we carefully guide the growth with proper planning, a planet city actually wouldn't be that bad. His method was a scale model for urban growth, starting from the smallest possible unit, a single person, then a household, then a neighborhood, then a city, a metropolis, an epiropolis, a continent scale city, and finally, the Ecumenopolis. The key unit here is a single person's daily walking radius, which varies depending on the type of settlement. Historically, the center gets defined when you overlap these walking fields and has led to cities around 50,000 people. But now with faster modes of transportation, like roads or rail, or in Coruscant, sky lanes, cities can grow beyond this. But for Doxiadis, we still have to keep this daily walking radius around these new transit hubs. But a working community unit is also defined by what it contains, in addition to this proximity rule. And these are the elements that it must contain. So Doxiadis' planet-wide city, it grows not by decking mega levels, but by tessellating human-scale cells into linear urban corridors that link up over time until they form a planet-wide web. He called the study Echistics, a system for how settlements grow and interconnect. And the system ensures that no matter how much you grow, it grows with a person in mind. But in his version of an Ecumenopolis, it didn't need thousands of levels. Okay, so in order to calculate this, Doxiadis took the average global density for built-up areas, giving you roughly 9,000 people per square kilometer. So if we covered 100% of the Earth's land surface, like Coruscant, theoretically, we could hold 1,336 billion people. But Doxiadis said we should reserve at least 50% of that land for wildlife and nature. And he also said the ideal living environment should be close to the countryside or recreation and open spaces, which took up about 2/3 of that remaining land. This will reduce the potential population to around 223 billion, lowering the average density to around 3,000 people per square kilometer. In fact, this was his ideal number. Now, that's roughly a quarter of Coruscant's population, so yes, it is much smaller, but that's also roughly the population density of this city, Camden, New Jersey. Nowhere close to the 5,000 levels in Coruscant. We haven't factored in the land that we're going to need for food, which does bring that number down quite a lot. But if 223 billion people takes up around 15% of the planet, shouldn't 1 trillion technically be closer to like 65% of the Earth's surface, not 100% across 5,000 levels? So what's going on here? Why does Coruscant need so many levels? Well, let's look at how Coruscant was built. By the way, this is our best guess based on the research. The phasing is not specifically stated in the canon. So if you have a different idea, let me know in the comments. So first, They picked a planet that was already urbanized as the galactic capital, and it was really for practical reasons, because it sat at the nexus of these major hyperlanes, so it just made sense for it to become the political and trade hub. Then they established a center point of that planet, and that will be the Senate District. They also set the official ground plane above the existing urban fabric. And they made a rule: you can build under it, but never above it. Then, since it's the capital of the friggin' galaxy, the center gets protected and layered with infrastructure for power and services or climate control. Everything within a certain radius of the center, in the horizontal and vertical direction, is built out to serve the center. At the same time, a lot of the economy and industry start to cluster around the center as well. But in order to build and feed all of this, they also set up dedicated industrial areas, like the works. Later, as factories move off-world, a lot of these areas get abandoned. But once they establish this core kit, with infrastructure with roads and power and services going to the center, this thing is copied across different districts, which is what I think these nodes are. It might look decentralized, but really it's centralized, because most of these are specialized districts that still serve the center. And all of the standards and budgets and regulations for these cloned hubs still come from the center. So it's really a hub and spoke city model. But here's where it gets interesting. At a certain point, each of these districts hit a wall, or what we call a threshold cliff. In traditional urban planning, this is a point where it becomes less and less efficient to expand horizontally. And it's essentially the same principle here, but in Coruscant, it would be anything beyond this core kit radius in the horizontal and vertical direction. Because up to a point, density pays. But once that core kit is full, expanding the district horizontally gets more expensive. Every new block at the edge forces you to do expensive upgrades. You can add a little area, but you pay for it. And that's the cliff. So in most cities, that's when they pivot vertical. Stack proximity instead of laying miles of new infrastructure. Sometimes the cliff is geography, but in most cases, it's the design. Radial cities with a centralized core hit the limit much faster than cities with grids with multiple cores. But in Coruscant, we are not just building taller buildings, but we're stacking entire new decks. And remember, Coruscant is not just a political capital, it's also a top-tier finance and commercial hub. But to render this planet-wide city, you don't need a fusion reactor. You can do it yourself with D5, who's the sponsor of today's video, and HP, who sent us this insane portable workstation. The HP ZBook Fury G1i18 looks like a regular laptop, but it actually packs a desktop-class CPU inside. It was perfect for running D5, which is a real-time rendering tool built for architects and designers. In our case, we use it to visualize future worlds and explain complex ideas. And we took advantage of this mobile workstation that is powered by an Intel Ultra Core 9, with up to 24 cores. It's super easy to create impactful scenes, like detailed building structures with dynamic lighting and cityscapes. For animating, you just drag and drop, and it works right away, without the need of keyframes. D5 exports high-quality stills from the same scene, including SketchUp, Revit, Rhino, and more. So any design change shows up instantly, and with a huge library of models and materials, your scenes look real in minutes. D5 actually has this end-to-end AI workflow built right in, with 10+ AI-powered features. They're basically a co-pilot for your design work, and it helps you brainstorm concepts while helping you automate repetitive tasks. And it all happened inside D5, running on the HP's high-performance workstation, without any external apps. And because D5 runs on HP's NVIDIA RTX Pro 5000 GPU, you see accurate lighting and reflections as you work. And thanks to the HP ZBook Fury G1i18, everything flowed at light speed. With up to 256 gigabytes of RAM and 16 terabytes of storage, we were able to handle massive D5 scenes, run language models locally, and edit or composite, all at the same time without any lag. This was a game changer for our designs, especially when recreating vast worlds that didn't even exist in the films. If you want to check out D5 and HP's incredible laptop, maybe to create your own planet city. I'll leave the link in the description. So over the centuries, more and more people move to the city, and the city keeps growing by layering and layering. And the reason why this is important is because the systems are not sized to serve this new level of growth. This is Dex's Diner in Cocoa Town, the industrial area. And this is their classic Shada club sandwich. Because of course, this is what a very future advanced civilization would be eating. But this simple sandwich, it's kind of a logistical miracle. Most of their food does come from other agricultural worlds, but they do still need to store and sort and blast the food across thousands of levels. Meaning, you need warehouses, cold chain shafts, processing floors, waste digesters, or condensate capture, and massive crews to keep all of that moving. Water is just as complicated. Maybe closed-loop recycling systems, or ice rock imports, or maybe hydrogen hauled from gas giants mixed with local oxygen to make new water. So in an Ecumenopolis, housing people is not necessarily the problem. It's the systems. Then there's the problem of waste. Apparently Coruscant produces 1 trillion tons of garbage per hour, and their solution is to shoot it out into space. There's over 5,000 pits across the planet where waste from the surrounding levels, they get collected and then compacted into pods, and then they get launched into orbit on scheduled trajectories. One of the garbage pits in the Wiko district is known to be around 2 kilometers in diameter and 3 kilometers in depth. Of course, there could be local variations, but if we use that as a base, that's roughly 94,000 cubic kilometers, which is around 4 times all of the 5 Great Lakes combined. Before the waste to even reach these pits, that's sewage systems and recycling cascades and utility shafts that could span hundreds of levels. Now, let's consider heat. This is me, 100 watts of heat. And this is your city, which is typically 5 degrees hotter than the surrounding areas. But a planet-wide city, that's 1 trillion people with no open oceans, no countryside, just 100 terawatts of heat with nowhere for it to go. But the real furnace is power use. Let's take Earth's average of 2.5 kilowatts per person. For 1 trillion people, that's 2.5 petawatts of heat that you have to dump into space continuously. Apparently, Coruscant is orbiting a much smaller sun compared to the Earth, so naturally it could be a little bit cooler, but that's still about 125 times the total human power used per day. So you need continental scale cooling and ventilation and thermal barriers so the heat doesn't bleed between the levels. Apparently these underworld portals double as ventilation shafts, so maybe they feed vacuum chimneys that beam the heat into space. But all of this cooling requires energy, which needs an entire system of reactors and radiators. And those take up a lot of space. But the most interesting part of Star Wars, I think, is the transportation system, which is this incredible 3-dimensional choreography, but not as efficient as you think. These are the main modes of transportation on Coruscant, organized from the most private to the most public. On the more private end, we have the personal airspeeders, which by default use auto-navigation on their sky lanes. And on the other end, we have the big passenger freightliners, which are kind of like your intercity buses. But this graph also aligns with the altitude. Upper tiers have these sky lanes, but the lower levels are much more dense, so flying is not really practical, and sometimes it's flat out restricted. There's also just the sheer cost of owning a vehicle and the space that you're gonna need for docking. And this traps people in their own strata, especially for the ones living below. This is the day of Amanda. She's a compliance analyst who rents a small place up in the mid-levels. She's usually up by 8, has a quick breakfast, and by 8:45, she's out the door and makes her way to the landing. By 9 o'clock, she's in her airspeeder. There's usually a bit of traffic during rush hour, but the stream keeps moving. Work is as usual. Monitor the lanes, clear some approvals, and answer some emails.
Wait. Emails?
Or holographic messages. For lunch, she goes across town to Dex's Diner, and she treats herself to a greasy slider. It's her guilty pleasure. And after work today, she's doing something a little adventurous. She drops a few thousand levels down to meet her friend at Desi's Noodles, the only place she's allowed access in the underworld. It's tiny and packed, but the bowl is worth the trip. Before climbing back into her airspeeder, she makes sure to leave enough tips. And she's home by 7:30. Now, let's take a look at the day in the life of Raph. He's a shaft maintenance tech, renting a room in the lower levels. He's usually up before 6. He eats a quick breakfast and leaves early, because his lift is usually late or malfunctioning. But today, he's in luck. From his stop, he takes a ride with the utility tram, which takes him directly to work. He's a little early today, and he feels good. Work is as usual: valves, gauges, leaks, and filing tickets for parts. For lunch, he heads over to Desi's Noodles. He usually eats by the staff window. Hot broth, quick line. And when he's done, he's back on station. After work, he heads across the line to meet up with his cousin. It's the usual chain: elevator to a transfer hall, walkway to the local train, then a public airspeeder up a service shaft, and then a final tram on the other side. By the time they've hugged and traded some goods, it's time to head back before it's too late. On the return, a security sweep stalls the checkpoint, and the primary lift is down. Big surprise. So he takes the catwalk. He gets home just around 9. He washes up, goes to sleep, just to start all over again. Even with the fastest vehicles that can literally cross the planet in less than a day, in a stacked city, it's not necessarily the distance, but the transfers that kill you. And over millennia of stacking, these paths harden into time cages. And people end up getting sorted by simply how far their hour can reach. And that's what we mean by the vertical trap. So the question is this unavoidable in an Ecumenopolis? We found a theory that might help us solve this problem. It's that the center of these concentric circles are actually the underground portals. And I think that's a pretty interesting idea. In our world, the most resilient megacities build centers around transit. Stations become these magnets for homes and jobs and shops, and developments concentrate around these hubs. But the most successful dense cities break these into multiple hubs, and they have a template that allow each of these transit hubs to become a kind of mini city. Let's take a look at Tokyo, for example. Instead of growing with one supercore, they multiplied the core around a loop, and they stitched it even more. And each station has a combination of lots of different functions. They exit onto the streets around them, with taller and denser buildings right at the exits. Then shops and services wrap around the concourse, meaning you can do your errands during your transfer. And you can keep most of your daily transfer within an hour. So what if Coruscant was designed around a constellation of hollow cores? Each core bundles transit and utilities and heat risers and services, and neighborhoods densify within walking or very close flying distance of it. Trips would shift within the core or one hop between cores, spreading the demand sideways instead of stacking upward. More cores also means more surface area for cooling and logistics, distributing people and power and waste and heat, and easing the pressure to add more levels. But the hubs alone are not going to fix the problem, because popular cores will still get crowded, and rents are going to spike, and the poor will eventually get pushed down. And the gaps between the cores suffocate. Heat, air, and water all fight for the same shafts. And especially with this redecking process, it means the levels below will, over time, inevitably suffer the same fate of bad air and no light. So after the many cores, you do need a rule for what stays open. This is Copenhagen's finger plan. The red are the station hubs, the yellow are the transit spines, and whites are the neighborhoods that develop around the hubs, and everything in green is left open. But these green, they're not just leftovers, they're essential infrastructure. They're lungs and sponges, storing stormwater and letting cool air flow through the city. Their district-wide heating grid also allows them to reuse waste heat from plants or data centers. They're also treated as productive landscapes, with swales and ponds and wetlands, and farms. And by adding this rule to Coruscant, we could reduce the distance between each neighborhood and their food. And by doing this, we could reduce the amount of systems that we're going to need to move the food. Some of the organic waste could also be recycled back and fed to these green areas. Multiple openings means the city can breathe and drain and cool passively without literal pipes sticking out of the atmosphere to dump heat. And by creating multiple cores, the density can spread sideways. A city-wide planet can breathe and drain and feed, and maybe we'll get a slightly more livable Ecumenopolis. But unless these clone hubs have autonomy, this many-core approach, it still acts centralized, and the bottleneck is still at the center. There is this concept that kept coming up as we were researching Ecumenopolis, the fractal. Because at this scale, it just makes sense to have patterns that you can repeat from block to region to the planet. Fractals promise this perfect order. You can copy a pattern and scale it forever. But cities are human, not math. So yes, design the planet like a fractal, with lots of planned and repeated pieces at every scale, but also design for the seams where it glitches. Because what keeps a planet city alive, I don't think it's the symmetrical perfection. It's the flexibility and adaptability. Let the center set the rules, and then get out of the way so that the millions of other decisions can be made at the local level. Even the clone army started from one template, but every clone ended up drifting. Cities will do that too. So if an Ecumenopolis works at all, it's not gonna be because the crown micromanaged perfection. It's gonna be because the map can survive on imperfection. So what do you guys think? Do you like this topic? And what do you guys think we should cover next? Let me know in the comments. And if you want any of the other resources for this video, I'll leave them in the description. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!